I'm Lisa de Nikolits, and I'd like to read to you from my latest novel, West of Wawa. They pulled into Medicine Hat and had an hour to explore, but Benny was feeling too lethargic to move. She was the Energizer Bunny felled by a tranquilizer dart intended for an elephant. She flopped down in her window seat and stared blankly at a church spire. Why am I so tired? Maybe I'm detoxing from all that massaging and aromatherapy. I've heard that happens. She looked out the window to see a powder blue Cadillac drive past with Just Married on the rear windshield, with cans and streamers dragging behind. Benny wondered what day it was. She'd lost track of time. Then she sat up in her seat, rudely dislodging Monkey Man and her guidebook onto the floor, and she stared ahead. A terrible thought had occurred to her. "Here you go, dear." The stern biddy with cat's eyes glasses picked Benny's belongings up off the floor, and Benny thanked her vaguely. Am I pregnant? She was horror-struck and immediately convinced that it was true. She clutched her stomach and felt as if she'd go crazy unless she knew one way or the other. She felt as sick as a dog on about 1,000 levels, and it wasn't from detoxing or too much massage. She tried to clear her mind and do the math, but she couldn't even remember when she'd had her last period. She tried to remember if it was up in Churchill. She'd kept such careful track of times and miles. How could she have let this get away from her? I can just think. Come on, think. She was so anxious that she chewed down 2 Valiums, apologizing to the baby if there was one. I'm panicking big time. I need to calm down. It'll be fine. It's fine. She fell into a drugged sleep. When she woke, they were in Alberta. She sat up, dying of thirst and disorientated. Was she pregnant? She wasn't going to think about it. That's all there was to it. She looked around, much the same crew on the bus. She'd sell her soul for a drink of water. At that moment, like an answer to a prayer, the bus pulled into the Greyhound terminal, and Benny leapt off, bought 2 Diet Cokes, a bottle of water, and a large bar of chocolate. She downed the water in one gulp, crammed the chocolate into her mouth, and bought a couple of Kit Kats for the bus ride coming up. Then she lit a smoke and wished she'd done more justice to Medicine Hat, just because it had such a cool name. Back on the bus, Benny rearranged her belongings and watched the green pastures of Saskatchewan vanish, along with the lovely yellow daisies. Alberta seemed more arid and brown. The asphalt fell away behind them, and Benny felt as if she'd landed on the moon. It was that pale and dusty, very flat and very brown. Wasn't there supposed to be famous beef out here? Where's all the famous beef? She did see a lot of horse trailers and Stetsons, which made her think about Dad, and she felt guilty. She hadn't emailed in the longest of times, and she'd have to take care of that in Calgary. Along the way, the bus loaded up with more passengers, and Benny wondered how everyone could fit. She also wondered if they were all headed for her hostel, the one where she wasn't able to book a bed. Would she lose the bed she didn't yet have? "Would you please stop bumping my seat like that?" she asked the boy behind her, who shrugged an apology he clearly didn't mean. Benny looked out at the endless brownness and knew in her achingly weary bones that this was going to be a long stretch, and not the easiest one at that. There was no escaping the fact that she felt a little more than green around the gills. Everything felt weird, and her head and knees ached painfully while nausea continued to swim through her blood. This couldn't be pregnancy, although the thought continued to haunt her. This had to be the flu. And while Benny loved a narcotic, she had no use for speed or drugs that made her hyper. She was born hyper. Thank you very much. And Benny, unbeknownst to her family and even Kenny, had been quietly imbibing feel-good chemicals for years. She was a teenager when a school friend introduced her to Valium, appropriated from the friend's mother's stash. And after that, Benny had found drugs relatively easy to come by, given the rarefied environment of the highly strung girls with even more highly strung mothers. In addition to which, she'd learned early that doctors will give you anything you want. It's simply a matter of manipulating the conversation, faking the symptoms, and the right expressions. And, following the disaster of epic proportions, that is, Kenny's relocation to the other team, Benny never had to worry again. And as for acquiring codeine, although it wasn't that easy, it was never problematically inaccessible. So Benny had no use for flu meds. They made her feel jumpy, restless, and anxious. Her nerves all shot to hell. So there she was, experienced drugstore cowgirl, right in the heart of Stetson land, without so much as an appropriate pill to ease her pain. Talk about the ironies of life. She tried to cool her forehead against the window, and she stared at the world outside. She'd never seen land like this. There was not a shrub, rock, barn, discarded car, Tractor, sheep, house, or postbox. Nothing. Nada. Zero. Brown flatness. And more brown flatness. No daisies, no ponds, no hay bales. Wow. She inspected further and concluded there was a kind of greyness to some of the brown. The sky was pale, the sun icy and shrouded, but piercing nonetheless. Benny looked into the sun and immediately saw black spots dancing in front of her eyes. Several hours later, she admitted that the Baroness had a certain empty appeal. Flat brown met more flat brown. Empty land touched empty sky. They were on the Trans-Canada Highway heading west, which was super cool bananas in Bennyland, and she wondered if her scrambled mental ramblings were due to flu, fever, prairie madness, or possible impending pregnancy. Shortly after sunset, they stopped somewhere nameless and faceless, and half the population of Canada clambered on board, all of them immediately putting their seats into maximum recline, and the bus was still the smaller grey velveteen version. The bigger, airier ones were ancient history. Oh, the luxury liners of the East. Outside, the scenery was also getting slightly less flat, and inside the bus there were changes also. The seats were full, with people having to stand at the back. A girl in front of Benny lost her seat by visiting the washroom, despite having left her possessions as a marker. This bus took no prisoners. Benny resolved not to move a muscle or drink any more liquids. I feel so sick. And it's a long, long way to Tipperary. Oops-a-daisy. I'm in Calgary. Maybe this is what they mean by the stampede? She bundled her hoodie into a pillow, clutched Monkey Man to her, and tried to doze. So that was a reading from West of Wawa, available in stores and online. Thank you.